Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. We are on page 9 of Connecting to the Qur'an, translated from Imam al-Nawawi's abridgment of his Al-Tibyan fi adabi hamalat al-qur'an. We're on chapter 4, titled Etiquette of Teachers and Students of the Qur'an. Imam al-Nawawi is going to begin with talking a bit about the intentions that both teachers and students should have when they read the Quran, and much of what he says here will apply to every subject. So much of what he says in this chapter is going to apply to anything you study and teach. And although his focus in the first half of the chapter will be on teachers, much of what he says, he will clarify, also applies to students too. So he says, Rahimahullah, teachers and students should both engage in the recitation of the Quran for the purpose of gaining the pleasure of Allah Most High. Allah Most High says in Surah Al-Bayyinah, and they were ordered no more than to worship Allah sincerely, keeping religion pure for Him, being upright, to establish the prayer, and to give obligatory charity, and that is the worthy religion. And Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu related that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, actions are only valued according to their intentions, and each person has only what he has intended. Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu said, a man memorizes to the degree of his intention. And the sages, and most likely Imam al-Nawawi is referring to Abu Qasim al-Qushayri, either to something that Imam al-Qushayri himself said, or just to the Risala of Imam al-Qushayri. So he may be quoting from either Imam al-Qushayri himself, or quoting from someone who Imam al-Qushayri quoted. Okay, so he says, the sages said, sincerity is purifying the action from being observed by people. And they said, sincerity is the worship's actions being identical in what is manifest and what is hidden. So far, what I've just read should be very clear about how it's connected to having sincerity. Okay? So none of that should really need to have any additional explanation over what we did last week. Next, Imam al-Nawawi starts talking into some specific issues that are related to niyyah and ikhlas. So what he mentioned before is just to lay down the general principles of having a good intention and having ikhlas. And now he's going to get into some details. And he says, in this section about not seeking a worldly objective, one's studies and teaching must not be for the purpose of attaining some worldly objective, such as wealth, leadership, influence, status above one's peers, gaining people's praise, or drawing others' attention to oneself. Because obviously all of those things are going to be negations of having sincerity, because the person would be seeking something other than Allah and doing those. And then Imam al-Nawawi gives a quotation from the Quran, from Surah Al-Isra, and he says, Allah Most High says, whoever desires the immediate gains of this world, we hasten what we will to whomever He wills. And what we understand from him mentioning that is that if you wanted some sort of worldly gain out of what you did, well, that's what you're going to get. And you're not going to get anything in the akhirah for it, because your intention was to get something in the dunya. So it's a general rule that everything in excess of our rizq that we get in the dunya is somehow at the expense of what we could have gotten in the akhirah. So just keep that in mind in your daily lives, but that's really a little bit tangential to what we're talking about here. Okay, so one's studies and teaching must not be for the purpose of attaining some worldly objective, such as wealth, leadership, influence, status above one's peers, gaining people's praise, or drawing others' attention to oneself. So those are things that a teacher should not have as a goal when he teaches. And it's something that a student should not have as a goal when he studies. We study for the sake of Allah, and we teach for the sake of Allah. Doesn't matter whether we get money, we get fame, we get recognition. Doesn't even matter if we put it into practice in the dunya. We do it for His sake. A Qur'an instructor does not dishonor his teaching by hoping to obtain some favor by way of an influential student who recites to him, whether the favor is in the form of property or some service, however small, or even a gift that he would not have received had he not been for his student reciting to him. So again, this is something that the instructor needs to purify his intention from. You teach because you're asked. You don't teach because of the person's connection and what you might get out of it. The teacher takes every precaution to refrain from boasting because of the many people under his tutelage and who patronize him. He is cautious about disliking his students reciting with someone else who offers them benefit. These afflictions put some ignorant teachers to the test, and they are clear indications of the evil intention and corrupt innermost metal of whoever possesses them. Indeed, they are sure proof of the teacher's lack of desire to teach for the sake of the noble pleasure of Allah Most High. So as I mentioned last time, if you're teaching and one of your students goes on to read with someone else, you should not think bad about them. You should not think bad about yourself. You should not think bad about the other teacher. The student might not have been able to attend your class anymore. The student might have risen to a level where he can benefit from someone and obtain a benefit that he couldn't get from you. Maybe he's reading with someone who is knowledgeable, more knowledgeable than you. You do not know where Allah has written the rizq of your student. It might not have been with you anymore. And in any case, if the student came to you and they gained skills and knowledge from you, and they were able to then go read with someone else, you still get some benefit out of it. It doesn't mean you're a failure. If anything, it means that you are a success. So don't get upset when the people you teach move on to read with other people. Even if the person they're reading with is, in your mind, not as good as you are, okay? Try to get that out of your mind, because it's going to ruin you. It's going to make you bitter. So even if you have to fool yourself a little bit into accepting it, just do it. It's going to be better for your heart in the long run. So don't get upset when your students go and read with other people, because this is about your sincerity also. Okay. Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, said, O bearers of knowledge, act according to your knowledge, since the scholar is the one who acts according to what he has learned and whose knowledge corresponds to his action. There will be groups who possess knowledge that does not go beyond their collarbones. Their action contradicts their knowledge. Their inward state contradicts their outward. They sit in circles vying with one another until a man becomes angry with the one he sits with, so he sits with someone else, leaving the one behind. Their actions in their assemblies of theirs do not descend to Allah Most High. So here Imam Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu is encouraging us and ordering us that our actions and our knowledge should correspond to one another. There should be a match there. If we're sincere, our actions will be based on our knowledge, and our actions will reflect what we know, and what we know we will act upon. And if that's the case, and if we're truly sincere, then if we ever dispute with other people, we'll dispute for the sake of Allah to arrive at the truth. All right? And because of that, if we dispute with someone and we can arrive at a resolution, and we're both better off for it. But what he describes in the second half are people who they don't have that ikhlas. And so what they've memorized never gets translated out onto their limbs. They gather knowledge, information, but they don't actually act upon it. And so they start fighting with each other, vying with one another, and eventually they end up parting on very sour terms. And so this is something that we need to avoid, and its avoidance is a reflection of our sincerity, inshallah. He also mentions, rahimahullah, that we need to be molded by good qualities. And he says the teacher should be molded by the good qualities mentioned in the revelation and the praiseworthy inner qualities and pleasing habits that Allah Most High calls attention to. Now, obviously, the best exemplar we're going to have for this is the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, to get a rich understanding of this, we would need to go to a book like the Shama'il, okay, to get some of those. If you have Bidayat al-Hidayah, or the beginning of guidance, I think it is how it's been translated, you will find sections in there that talk about the qualities, the moral and physical and habitual qualities of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Those are the qualities that we're supposed to have. Okay, those are the ones that both teachers and students are supposed to attain. So for even more information that he has here, you can go there. But you can also go to Imam an-Nawawi's Riyadh al-Salihin, the Gardens of the Righteous, where he's given a huge collection of those. Of course, you're going to have to read through the hadiths and the titles to get it, but it's well worth it. So Imam an-Nawawi gives a small enumeration here where he says, they include abstinence in this world, zuhud, thinking little of it, and lacking concern for it and its worldly people. They also include generosity, open-handedness, noble character, a cheerful face, discernment, and self-control. They include avoiding vile forms of income, adhering to scrupulousness, humility, tranquility, dignity, modesty, submission, and avoiding laughter and frequent play. They also include adhering to religious tasks, such as maintaining cleanliness and removing filth and hair that the sacred law mentions removing, trimming the mustache and nails, and combing the beard, and removing offensive smells and offensive clothing. Now, many of these things are things that you would pick up when you read fiqh, or if you read one of the derivatives of Imam al-Ghazali's Ihya Ulumuddin. These things are talked about at length in other books. All Imam an-Nawawi wanted to draw our attention to here are some of the things that you ought to be maintaining if you're a teacher of the Qur'an, or a student of the Qur'an, or a bearer of the Qur'an, or really if you're a Muslim, because remember he said that these are the things that have been mentioned in the revelation, and they're the things that Allah has called attention to. And that's for everyone, not just for students and teachers. So all of that is for a different lesson or a different course. He continues by mentioning the teacher should be perpetually conscious of Allah Most High, whether alone or in public. He should fear Allah, he should have taqwa, whether he's in front of people or whether he is alone. And if we go back to sincerity, Imam an-Nawawi quotes people mentioning that sincerity is that what you have in public and in private are the same. All right, so it fits into here also. Someone who has taqwa and sincerity, the way they behave alone and the way they behave in public will be the same. And whether people are watching them or not, their essential intention will be the same. Next, Imam an-Nawawi is going to talk about uprooting sicknesses of the heart. And it makes sense to move into this because in the previous section, he was talking about good qualities. These are the things that you should add. And now he's going to talk about the things that you should remove. But before we do that, Ashraf Ali has a quick question.
So I was going to say that, barakallahu feekum, that if a person is such that if they lead the prayer outside, they recite, let's say Maghrib, or Aisha, or Fajr, they recite a longer surah when they're, let's say, leading the prayer in public, compared to if they're praying alone. Or they recite in a more beautiful voice when they are in public, leading the prayer in the masjid, for example, compared to if they were praying at home. Does that go against sincerity? Because we said that the public and private should be the same.
No, it doesn't go against it, but it's not something that we can go into at length here. The reason it doesn't go into it is because there's times when we can be encouraged to do something in public, like if you're someone who's followed as an example. If you're a leader who's going to be imitated, then sometimes we are encouraged to do things to set the example for other people. So let's try to get back to where we were in the book. So he just talked about the mainly physical characteristics and positive moral actions that we should have. And after talking about the things that we should develop that are external and visible, the embellishments, it only makes sense that he would also talk about removing the defects that might get in the way. So he says next, uprooting sicknesses of the heart. He must take every precaution from the sicknesses of the heart, such as envy, pride, showing off, and thinking little of others, even if they are beneath him. He must not see himself as better than anyone else. And Imam al-Nawawi, at the end of this chapter, will go through and he will give us some tips on how we can do that. And if anyone wants lots and lots of details about that, you can also get Imam al-Sulami's book about the infamies of the soul, where he will give tons of problems that we have in our nafs, as well as advice on how to deal with it. But we need to move on and not get bogged down into that. Next, Imam al-Nawawi is going to talk about some more of the etiquette that a teacher should have. Now, what went before is very much shared between teachers and students, and now he's going to move into things that are more related to the activities of the teacher. And he says, the teacher should be kind to whomever recites to him, welcoming him and being well-mannered with him in accordance to his circumstances. Great advice. The teacher should meet his students with smiles, cheer. I know I'm not a good example on this one, okay, but they should greet the student. And that one is pretty apparent. But then there's a thing about being well-mannered with him in accordance to his circumstances. We're not really talking about the teacher's circumstances here. We're talking about the student's circumstances. When you have a student who's having a bad time, you have to cut them slack. Okay? Every student we have, we need to try to approach them as an individual. So we teach individuals, we don't teach classes. We don't give lectures, we give lessons to individuals. They may happen to be sitting in the same room, but we're really trying to give attention to each individual one of them, and we're going to try to also take care of them. And something that we should be getting or noticing as we read the etiquette that a teacher should have is that Imam al-Nawawi doesn't look at teachers as people who just convey information. He looks at teachers as people who are murabbis. They do development of their students. And one of the reasons for this is that the Qur'an teacher typically would be the first person, the first sort of instruction that a young kid would get. And one of the wadhifas, or one of the functions or jobs of that Qur'an teacher, is to teach character development to the child or to that young student. And so because of that, teachers of people who are young and also teachers of new Muslims, they're going to have to accommodate behavior that they wouldn't accept from an adult. So anyways, they need to be well-mannered with him, with the student, in accordance to the student's circumstances. He should make every effort to be sincere with whomever recites to him, given that sincere advice to others is obligatory, and they, his students, are even more worthy of it. And he's going to give us more of an explanation about why we need to have so much more sincerity with them. And he continues saying the teacher should not be arrogant towards his students. Now, this one can be tough because you're the teacher, you know more. The student is coming to you because they don't know as much as you, right? It's very easy to get into a position where a sick nafs in the teacher leads them to abuse and belittle and berate their students. This is something that the teacher has to be on guard of. Okay, the teacher should not be arrogant, should not, must not. Unless that there is some sort of religious sanctioned justification for it, You shouldn't be arrogant towards your students or anyone else. The teacher must be open-handed by teaching students gently, being kind towards them, encouraging them to learn, and harmonizing their hearts. And now, inshallah, Sarah has part of the answer to the question that she asked in the chat. He teaches them that the scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. May Allah bless them and give them peace. Why? Because the teacher does this so that the student not only gives proper respect to the scholars, but also so that the student has some encouragement to become a teacher so that they can inherit some of this inheritance, so they can be a participant in that greatness. The teacher is mindful of his student's well-being, just as he is mindful of his own and his son. The teacher assumes the role of the student's father by having compassion for him, concern for his well-being, and patience with his roughness and ill manners. He pardons his student's poor behavior in some circumstances. The teacher gently admonishes him about the ugliness of those acts so that he does not repeat them. The teacher, without exception, should like for his student what he likes for himself, and dislike for him the shortcomings he dislikes in himself. Now, as Imam al-Nawawi points out here, and as he explains in more details in the Tibyan, when you take on someone as a student, it is as though they have become one of your children. Now, we're not talking about any sort of familial relationship here. We're talking about a relationship of care and concern and kindness. When you start teaching someone, you have to take interest and concern for their well-being, just as you would with your own children. Because if you think about it, if you are transmitting knowledge to them, and they transmit knowledge to someone else, then it's as though they're your child, and the one that they transmitted to is their grandchild. So in this way also they are your child, right? And just as you have all of this concern for your own biological children, you need to have concern for your intellectual or your scholarly children. And just with your own children, you're going to put up with some things because you're always after their welfare, which means you have to look at the big picture and the long game. It means that sometimes you're going to overlook some roughness and ill manners. Because, if you're trying to improve someone, you can only focus on so many things at once. So maybe you pick one bad quality and you work on it, and you kind of ignore all of the other bad qualities, because if you go one by one, eventually the list of bad qualities is going to diminish towards zero, inshallah. So just as you would do that with your own kids, you should do that with your student. Notice also he says the teacher gently admonishes him about the ugliness of those acts so that he not repeat them. So when you want a student to stop doing something, yes, you tell them don't do it, but you also give them a little bit of an explanation of why. Because if they don't know why, they'll never know why not to do it again. And they'll never know whether it was the act at that time or the act in general that they shouldn't be doing. Unless we give some reasons, you can't expect your children or your students to be able to think on their own, act on their own, act appropriately in new circumstances. So we got to give some reasoning. Now, you can make a good case that when they're too young, they can't really get it yet. Fine, I'm with you. But there has to be an age where a student is open to understanding, grasping, and applying the reasons that you give them. So as a teacher, you have to be on the watch for this, and you have to start giving them the reasons so that they can start acting as a good human being on their own without constant supervision at all times. Okay? If you're a parent, one of the things you're going to end up having to do is give your kids room to screw up in scenarios where it's really not going to be that harmful. So while they're still in the house, you give them enough room to make a bad decision, a bad harmless decision. And then you try to teach them not to do that again. And if you teach them to be responsible people while they're still in your house, then inshallah, when they leave your house, they'll already have the habit. And as a parent, you'll also be confident that it's already ingrained in them. Okay, the teacher, without exception, should like for a student what he likes for himself, and dislike for him the shortcomings he dislikes in himself. Imam al-Nawawi here is just giving a particular application of the hadith about none of you truly believes until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. Here it's being particularized to your student. You as a teacher don't truly believe until you love for your student what you love for yourself. So it's just an application of that hadith from the collection of 40 Nawawi hadiths. Okay, so next Imam Nawawi moves on to teaching the merits of knowledge and manners. Now, in the first session, we talked about some of the merits and the superiority of studying and teaching the Qur'an, which makes sense because that's what this book is about, right? But here he's going to talk about knowledge in general. And Imam Nawawi says the teacher should mention the superiority of learning to the student so that it causes him to be eager and increases desire, making him abstinent from this world and desirous of the afterlife. If the student knows why, they're more likely to want to do it. It will increase the likelihood of being self-motivated. The teacher should be fully committed to teaching his students, preferring it over his personal worldly matters that are not critical. It is recommended that he empty his heart of all preoccupying matters, and there are many known to us. While sitting for their recitation, it is recommended that he be resolved to making his students understand. Okay, so up until the last sentence, when you teach, when you pray, when you do anything, you want to do it solely for Allah, right? And if you're teaching, you also want to make sure that you can give your best to your student in order to increase the likelihood that they're going to understand what you're saying. So how do we do this? When it comes to prayer, we have the nawafil, right? You pray 2 rak'ah or 4 rak'ah before you pray the obligatory prayer. And one of the things that the ulama point out is that the wisdom in this is it's a buffer between the obligatory act and the dunya around you. It gives you a little cooling down period. Okay? This works in prayer. It can also work in classes. Before you teach, make wudu, use miswak, pray 2 rak'ah, go to a quiet place, take a few moments of just chilling out. All of these things are means to trying to empty your heart while you're teaching and doing other things from preoccupying matters. Okay? Not that difficult to come up with ideas, very difficult to actually put into practice. His last sentence here is, it is recommended that he be resolved to making his students understand. The teacher should really have in his mind that it is his responsibility to convey the information, the knowledge, and the understanding to his students. And if the students initially don't understand, then he repeats. If they still don't understand, find a slightly different way of doing it. Keep going until, inshallah, the student finally gets it. And if this is our responsibility, and the student is not being intentionally obtuse, then we shouldn't get frustrated and we shouldn't get impatient. As long as we see that the student is making some efforts, some sincere efforts to really understand, then we should be going out of our way to make sure that they do get it. Okay. He should give each student what is suitable for him. That is, he should not give a greater workload to one who cannot bear the increase, nor should he lessen the load for one who can indeed bear the addition. This is probably contrary to the way a lot of hifz classes are done today, where the entire class is assigned the exact same assignment. And if that's how a Qur'an teacher is approaching things, where it's an entire class and it's not individuals, then he's not going to do his job very well. In the end, you really have to look at each of your students. You have to know what their situation is, what they can bear, what they can't bear. Because when it comes to our students, we're going to see that sometimes we have to encourage and sometimes we have to discourage and sometimes we have to discipline. And all of that has to be tailored to the student, because in the end, you're going for the welfare of your student, not your welfare, not the class as a collective's welfare. You got to teach each student. Okay, so when it comes to bearing an increase they can't bear, if you know the student can do 10 ayat, you give them 10. But if you know they can only do 1, you don't give them more than 1. Because you don't want to break them. And if you know that a student is just awesome, everything you give them, they can take. Keep it up. Don't ruin the momentum. So the teacher should gradually discipline the student. Notice gradually discipline, not give everything all at once. The teacher should gradually discipline the student so that he may have excellent manners and a pleasant disposition, that he struggle against his lower self, his nafs, by applying subtle tactics. And I mentioned there's the book of Imam al-Sulami, or Yuba Nafs, that students can use, even though it can be a little bit heavy at times. The teacher should habituate him so as to safeguard all of his students' affairs, both private and public. The teacher should urge him repeatedly in words and in deeds, so not only in word but also in example, to have sincerity, be truthful, have perfect intentions, and to be vigilant of Allah Most High at all times. Now, obviously, if the teacher is telling the student to do this, it's even more appropriate for the teacher to be doing this too. Okay, so the teacher should be disciplined so that they have excellent manners and a pleasant disposition, and they should actually be doing it. And the teacher should also be struggling against his lower self. And the teacher should also habituate himself to safeguard his own affairs, both in private and public. And the teacher should urge himself repeatedly to be sincere, be truthful, have perfect intentions, and to be vigilant of Allah Most High at all times. And may we all have success in this. The teacher should inform him that through all of this, all of the above, Ashraf has asked that we talk about physical discipline. What I usually say whenever it comes up in the book is that physical discipline is always for the best interests of the student. And so if you're in a time and place and an age where any sort of physical discipline is going to not contribute to the welfare of the child, then you don't do it. Also, if you're in a situation, time, place, where a slap on the hand can be positive, then you're still not allowed to do anything that's going to leave a mark, cause injury, cause lasting pain, because those aren't actually going to contribute to the welfare of the child. So some of the things we hear about today about how kids are beaten with a stick to memorize the Qur'an, I don't see how this actually is going to be positive overall. Now, they might memorize the Qur'an, but are they going to like it? Are they going to have positive ideas and experiences while doing it? No. They're going to do it because if they don't, they're going to get hurt. They're not going to do it out of love of Allah. They're not going to do it out of wanting to carry out the commands and prohibitions of the Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're going to do it because a human being forced them to do it. And if they don't do it, that human being is going to torture them. If they did it out of concern for some sort of pain in the afterlife, then at least their niyyah would be acceptable. But to only do it out of fear that Ustad is going to hurt me, then we're already teaching them to have a bad, deficient niyyah. Okay, so what about our kids? It's similar. Anytime you discipline someone who's under your authority, it has to be for their best interest, not yours. So you don't discipline anyone when you're angry. You don't discipline them because you like it. You discipline them only because you are very, very confident that it is going to be in their best interest. It will make them better for you having done it. And if you are certain that it is not going to harm them. The parameters in which physical discipline is permitted according to the law is very narrow. The teacher should inform him that through all of this, everything that we mentioned above, the light of spiritual knowledge will open to him, and his heart will also be open, and that the well springs of wisdom and subtleties will gush forth from his heart, and Allah will bless him in his work and state of being, giving him success in whatever he says and does. So if you have good character, and if you have good intention, and if you purify your heart, and if you get rid of all of the bad qualities that we're supposed to get rid of, and if you avoid the haram, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you knowledge through means other than just hitting books and going to lessons. When you remove all of those preventers, then Allah will give you some hidden knowledge that you would never have been able to obtain through normal means. It might not happen to you. It might not happen to everyone, but it is very, very well documented of people who are given knowledge beyond what they would have been able to obtain through the normal means. And something else I want to point out is that when you read the Qur'an with your heart as it should be, and you read the Qur'an as we're supposed to read it, there's an interaction. It's not just you reading the words. The words will have an effect on you too. And that typically isn't going to happen unless you take all of the measures that have been talked about so far. And also if you don't do the adab that are going to come in the coming chapters. This also will encourage the students because it will make it easier for them in the long run to move forward. By removing those preventers, they will accelerate in gaining knowledge and approaching Allah. Okay, so next Imam al-Nawawi is going to talk a little bit about how people should have their classroom. So he talks a bit about the classroom etiquette that teachers should have. So he says, he should ask the students to repeat what they have memorized. He should remind them to memorize, because what's going to happen if his students don't repeat it? They will forget it. Okay, so he should ask his students to repeat what they have memorized. Moreover, he should praise a student whose excellence is manifest, as long as there is no danger of conceit or something else that may be feared of him. So here's another one of those examples where you have to have knowledge of your students, of your individual students, not just the entire class. You have to have knowledge of the individual students in order to do this. So you should praise a student whose excellence is manifest, someone who does a really good job. Praise them as long as there is no fear that they're going to become conceited or develop some other bad attribute or action because of it. He should gently admonish someone who falls short in his studies as long as he does not fear alienating him. So if it's a student who can be praised without it going to his head, and if it's a student who can be admonished without it causing more harm, then you admonish them and you praise them. And the only way you can do this is if you know the student as a human being, as an individual, and not just some face that shows up in class. When there are many students, the teacher gives precedence in instructing his students according to the order in which they arrive. First come, first served. He does not allow one who came earlier to give a spot to someone without a religious justification, since it is offensive to give others preference in devotional matters. At the beginning of the paragraph, he's talking about people that just show up randomly. Maybe they have a general time slot, and they all show up during then. He's not talking about the case where someone has like a scheduled time with an instructor. Okay, if someone already has a scheduled time, then they should be given priority. Okay, but when there are many students that show up and they're all equal, the student gives precedence in instructing his students according to the order in which they arrived. He does not allow one who came earlier to give a spot to someone without a religious justification, since it is offensive to give others preference in devotional matters. In prayer, if we have a spot closer to the Imam, we don't give it to someone else. Why? Because it's a devotional matter. When it comes to learning the Quran, it's also a devotional matter. So we keep it. We don't give our closer spot to someone else. He must check up on them and ask about whomever is absent. When you have regular students and some of them are not showing up or one of them isn't showing up, you're supposed to ask about how they're doing. Are they sick? Go visit them. This right now is an action that all of us should be applying. So while we're all undergoing this mandatory social distancing and quarantine, we should be checking up on our friends, on our students, our colleagues, make sure everyone's doing okay, because this is what part of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. He does not deny anyone instruction because of unsound intention. Sufyan Thawri and others said their seeking knowledge is intention in itself. And we have some other scholars that pointed out that even if you seek knowledge with not great intention, the knowledge itself will straighten out your intentions. That as you gain knowledge, that knowledge will rectify your intention. Now, Ashraf asks if we have any examples of justifications for giving other people priority, giving them your place. Is age one of them? No, apparently not. If you're there first, you take it. Okay, there's another question. In the modern learning context, how important do you believe memorization is versus focusing on solidifying underlying concepts? I think the easy answer to this is that the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum wouldn't memorize anything until they understood. They wouldn't memorize something new until they understood what they had just memorized. So instead of making it of which one is more important, let's just do them both together here. And that is how I'm going to weasel my way out of having to give a better answer. Because if we have too many questions, we're not going to get anywhere. You still want a justification for giving someone your spot. Okay, we're talking about instruction here, not about prayer. Why would you give someone a spot when it comes to teaching, when it comes to seeing a judge? Well, you might give someone a spot because they have to travel. If you know that they've traveled from far away and they're going to have to leave again, that can be a reason to give them priority. If it's a woman and you have reason to believe that she's going to have to go back and attend to something, like her house or her children, then you can give her priority. Those are some examples. Okay, so you're probably going to ask, what about our parents? Can we give them priority? Yeah, probably. Out of deference to your parents? Probably. But I'm not talking about the prayer. I'm talking about when we line up for things like memorizing the Quran, obtaining knowledge, seeing a judge. So some of them, Sufyan Thawri, rahimahullah, and others said their seeking knowledge is intention in itself. So if we have someone who comes to study with us and they don't seem to have the best intentions, then we're still going to teach them. Not fidgeting during recitation. During his student's recitation, the teacher should not fidget with his hands. He should keep his eyes from needlessly glancing around without a legal need. And he should not listen attentively except to the reciter. He should not be in a state. Okay, so up until here, the teacher shouldn't be distracted. He shouldn't be showing signs of distraction, and he shouldn't be distracted. He should be focusing on the student that is either reciting to him or studying with him. He should be in a state of ritual purity and seated facing the direction of prayer. Okay? If he can, he should be in ritual purity, whether he's teaching Quran or other subjects. He should be in the state of purity. Although for teaching Quran, it's obviously something that is more emphatic. And also, if possible, he should be facing the direction of prayer. And if he sits in a dignified manner, wearing clothing that is white and clean. All things being equal, white clothing is going to be better. When he reaches the place where he is to sit, to teach, he prays 2 prayer cycles, 2 raka'at, before actually sitting, whether or not the location is a mosque. So this is still another one of the things that it is recommended for a teacher to do. And I mentioned earlier that one of the wisdoms of doing this is it helps form a buffer between what you're about to do and all of the concerns of the dunya. This practice is emphasized more if it is in a mosque, since it is offensive to sit in a mosque before praying. So Imam al-Nawawi here is talking about Tahiyyat al-Masjid, the 2 rak'ah that are typically prayed when we go into a mosque. Before sitting down, when you go into a mosque, you should be praying 2 rak'ah. It's offensive for you to sit down. It's offensive for you to sit down after entering the mosque before you pray these 2 rak'ah or any other 2 rak'ah. As far as the intention that you would have in the 2 rak'ah out of the mosque, just nafilah. Okay, so praying the 2 rak'ah before you sit down to teach is even more emphasized if you're teaching in the mosque, since it is offensive to sit in a mosque before praying. And this, the recommendedness of doing this, it's at all times of day. So even if you've already prayed Asr and you exit the mosque and then you go into another mosque to teach, you would still go ahead and you would pray the 2 rak'ah for entering the mosque. If you want to know more, then we'll have to do it in a fiqh lesson. Also, he may sit cross-legged. It is related that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu ta'ala anhu would have people recite to him in the mosque while kneeling. So you can sit kneeling, you can sit cross-legged, you can sit on a chair. You need to sit in a respectable way, though. It is an emphasized etiquette that the teacher not disgrace the status of knowledge by teaching in a place associated with his student, whether the student is a khalif or a person of lower rank. This one's a little bit weird today. What Imam al-Nawawi and others were talking about is that you would not go to someone and teach at their place because of a rank that they have, while not going to teach at someone else's place who does not have that rank, okay? Because there, you're denigrating the knowledge a little bit, okay? Because if they won't come to you, but you have to go to them, then it's as though they're more important than the knowledge that they're supposed to be obtaining. Imam Malik refused to go to the governor to teach him, and he insisted that the governor come to him in order to preserve the dignity of the knowledge. Okay, the knowledge is important, then you should be going to it. So it is an emphasized etiquette that the teacher not disgrace the status of knowledge by teaching in a place associated with his student. So at the Sultan's palace, for example, if people are going to see you go into it and you want them to see you, then we definitely know there's something wrong going on here. And this applies whether the student is a khalif or someone of a lower rank. Instead, he safeguards the knowledge from this, just as the righteous forebears, the Salaf Salih, did, and may Allah be pleased with them and grant us His mercy. So Ashraf asked about what about just teaching in private houses? Yeah, for the most part, this is okay. If it's just like a general person's house, it's not really a problem at all. The problem is when you go to a place that is associated with rank and prestige. If you make everyone else come to you, but then you go out to the Sultan to teach, then what does that say about what you're teaching? It would appear to people that you think the Sultan is more important than what you're teaching. But if you're a teacher of the Qur'an is way above the Sultan's head. Don't we want politicians to feel that they're below the ilm, not that they are above the ilm? Okay, so this is something that you want them to come to study just like everyone else. Okay. Imam al-Nawawi next talks about the legal ruling of teaching, and he says teaching is a communal obligation. If only one individual is qualified, it becomes his personal obligation. But in the context of a community, in which there is a group of people through whom the duty of education may be discharged and they fulfill it, the sin falls from the rest. If they refuse to teach, they all sin unless they have a legal excuse. Okay, so if only one individual is qualified, they're going to have to teach. And they're going to have to do everything in their power to be able to teach. If there are several people that can do the teaching, then a number of them will have to do it up until the point that we can say that teaching is being fulfilled. Now, what do we consider it to be enough? What they typically would say is that we have to have enough teachers teaching and enough students studying so that we can maintain tawatur, so that we can maintain enough parallel transmissions of the Qur'an that we can be sure that they could never have agreed upon an error. If our community is big enough, that's what we need to have. Okay. If everyone refuses to teach, then they all sin, unless they have some sort of legal excuse for not doing it. Like a legal excuse like what? Like they have to already work 3 jobs to make ends meet, and they only have 8 hours a day at the end. And so they're using some of that to sleep and some of it with their family, and they don't have any time left to teach. So we've talked about the teacher's etiquette. And in Al-Tibyan, Imam al-Nawawi gives a lot more. But what we're getting here is it's pretty good. And after talking about the teacher's etiquette, he's going to move on to the student's etiquette. And he says, all of the teacher's etiquette that we have mentioned is in essence the student's etiquette as well. But the student's etiquette also includes avoiding any concerns that preoccupy him from achieving his objectives, except that which is unavoidable because of need. So when someone is a student, they really need to be concentrating on being a student. If they don't have to work, don't work, study. If you don't have to have a family, don't have one yet, study. Okay, so as a student, you really should try to avoid anything that is going to preoccupy you from achieving your objectives of studying. Now, obviously, there's going to be some things that are unavoidable. Okay, so you might have to work. You might need to get married. You might need to blow off a little bit of steam. But for the most part, you need to try to avoid everything that would occupy you from studying. He should purify his heart from any corruption so that it is fit for receiving the Qur'an, memorizing it, and profiting from it. In the Tibyan, Imam al-Nawawi has a quote where he says that the meaning roughly is that the heart has to be cultivated to receive knowledge, just as the earth has to be cultivated in order to grow crop. So your heart has to be tended in order for it to really be ready to receive knowledge. If you don't go remove your blameworthy characteristics, if you don't stop eating the haram and doing the haram, then you're probably not going to get much knowledge. Your heart will object to it and it will repel it. And you probably won't profit or benefit from it. So again, Imam al-Nawawi is just emphasizing why is it that we need to work on purifying our intention and purifying our heart, because if we're a student and we're investing a lot of our time in studying, we want to make sure that we're able to make use of it. And in order to make sure that we can make use of it, we need to make sure that we're prepared to both receive it and to benefit from it. So we're going to have to concentrate a lot on the status of our heart. Okay, the student should show humility towards knowledge, so that he attains it by means of his humility. Some have said in verse, knowledge destroys the arrogant youth, like the torrent erodes high ground. So the student shows humility towards his student's knowledge and his person, even if he is younger, less famous, of a lower degree, less righteous, or lacking in other qualities. The deference that you show your teacher is a reflection of the deference that you show the knowledge. Okay, the more humble you are towards the knowledge, the more likely you are to get something out of it. The student should obey his teacher, consult him in his affairs, and accept his opinion. An ill person who is rational accepts the opinion of an experienced, sincere physician. With religious knowledge, this is even more appropriate. Okay, so Imam al-Nawawi here is not saying that anything your religious teacher says you have to follow blindly. He's not calling for blind obedience to the ulama in everything they say. No. What he's talking about is deferring to expert opinion. And here we're talking about studying religious knowledge. And so he's talking about deferring to the expertise of the religious scholar in affairs that are related to religious knowledge and that to which they apply. He says, an ill person who is rational accepts the opinion of an experienced and sincere physician. He said physician, not plumber, and not alim. So someone who's ill will accept the opinion of someone whose expertise is in dealing with their illness. So likewise, when it comes to other subjects, we're going to defer to the better knowledge and skills and experience of those people who specialized in that area. He next talks about studying with the elite. The student does not take knowledge except from someone whose competence is complete, his religiosity visible, has realized profound knowledge of Allah. In Arabic, Imam al-Nawawi uses the word here, ma'rifa, and is well known as a person who is free of debilitating problems. The righteous forebears, may Allah be pleased with them and grant them His mercy, have said, this knowledge is religion, so examine well the one from whom you take your religion. Take from the best that you have available. Okay? Take from the most knowledgeable person you can find, someone who has a good reputation for being righteous. Now, almost no one is going to be free of some sort of problem, so seek out the person who seems to be the least troublesome of them. And notice the quote at the end, this knowledge is religion, so examine well the one from whom you take your religion. This really is very important because we don't want to go taking religious knowledge from people who themselves really aren't concerned at all for putting it into practice. And least of all, we should be very careful of taking Islamic knowledge from people who aren't even Muslim. The student should look to his teacher with the eye of respect, believe with unwavering conviction in his competence and superiority over his contemporaries. Imam al-Nawawi in the Tibyan mentions that before going to a class, you should make sadaqah and you should make a dua that Allah hides your teacher's faults from you. We all know that our teachers have faults, and it's better for us not to see them, and it's also better for the sheikh that they not be seen. The student visits his sheikh with the most excellent manners, keeping himself tidy with everything we have just mentioned concerning the teacher, cleanliness, regular use of the miswak, and a heart free of preoccupation. He does not enter without seeking permission, unless the teacher is in a place that does not require it. Okay, so for example, the teacher has an office with posted hours, or the teacher sits in a public place welcoming students. In that case, you don't need permission. But if the teacher is teaching out of his house, or he's teaching out of an office with a closed door, you want permission before you enter in. The student greets the attendees upon entering, and then singles out his teacher with his greeting, and likewise he bids farewell to him and the assembly in general when he departs. When a student enters an assembly, he's going to give salams in general. Maybe not very loud, but he's going to give salam. But then he's going to single out his teacher by giving him salam also. And then when exiting, he will do the same. The student does not step over others and sits wherever the assembly's perimeter happens to be, unless the sheikh gives him permission to come forward, or he knows from his sheikh's behavior that he prefers it. He does not let someone rise from his place out of deference. Some of this we've already covered when we were talking about giving other people your place. So what is the rule for giving salam when you come into the class? He does not sit between two companions except with their permission, and if they make room for him, he sits and squeezes himself in. And we relate that the commander of the faithful, Ali ibn Abi Talib, may Allah be pleased with him, said, "The rights the teacher has over you include that you greet others in general, but you single him out with greeting to the exclusion of the rest. They also include sitting in front of him, not pointing with your hand in his company, not winking your eye at someone, not citing an opinion contrary to his, and not backbiting anyone while in his presence. And they include not conferring with someone sitting near you while in his audience, not grabbing his garment, not being insistent when he is apprehensive about something, and not being disharmonious or getting frustrated with him, such that you become fed up with his company after a length of time." So Imam Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu mentions many of the things that Imam al-Nawawi has already mentioned, as well as a few more. And Imam al-Nawawi continues saying, "The student should also have proper etiquette with his companions and those attending the Sheikh's assembly, since this is an extension of having good etiquette with the Sheikh and preserves the dignity of his assembly. He sits in the presence of the Sheikh in the humble manner of a student and not that of a teacher. Even if you yourself are a teacher of another subject or that subject, when you enter into another Sheikh's assembly where he's teaching, you need to behave as a student, not as a teacher. He does not raise his voice exaggeratedly, laugh, or speak much without need. He does not fidget with his hands or the like. He does not turn right or left without need. Rather, he faces the Sheikh, attentive to his words." Now, it probably would have been enough for Imam al-Nawawi to say that he respects the teacher in the assembly and he doesn't engage in disruptive behavior, but we really need to have these things spelled out and detailed, because if we don't, people are going to ask, or people will go ahead and engage in things not realizing that they shouldn't be done. He should not recite to the Sheikh when the Sheikh is preoccupied or bored, or while he is reluctant, distressed, overjoyed, hungry, thirsty, tired, troubled, or experiencing anything that makes it difficult for him or prevents him from having complete presence of heart or from being energetic. So just as a teacher needs to be aware of the moods of his students, the students are going to need to be aware of the moods of the teacher. The student should take full advantage of the times when the teacher is energetic. The student's etiquette includes bearing with the Sheikh's coarseness and bad aspects of his character and not being dissuaded from remaining with him and believing in his expertise. Just as a teacher is supposed to overlook some of the student's bad behavior while doing tarbiyah for the student, students are also asked to give some slack to their Sheikh. We do the best we can, all of us, and we all should try to seek doing better. The student offers valid excuses for a Sheikh's actions and utterances that outwardly seem flawed. If the Sheikh is discourteous towards him, the student takes the initiative to apologize to the Sheikh, outwardly showing that the offense is his and that he deserves a reprimand. From what I recall, Imam al-Nawawi mentions that this is better for the student's heart. Okay, even if the student knows that the Sheikh was mistaken, he should still do this. Chances are the Sheikh feels pretty bad about it too. And there's no problem here with the student being the better man here. And everyone's going to come out better for it because you've communicated it, it's on the table, you can move on, forgive each other, inshallah. The student's etiquette includes his determination to study, incessantly doing so anytime the opportunity arises. And if we remember Imam al-Nawawi's biography that we read in the very session, everywhere he went, he would be repeating lessons. When he was walking in the path between lessons, he would be repeating lessons. When he would walk to go somewhere, he would be repeating lessons. He is not satisfied with little when much is possible, yet he does not burden himself with more than he can bear, out of fear of boredom and losing what he has gained. And this varies according to each student's character and circumstances. I know that when we start moving and getting momentum, and we find things getting easier, we're tempted to take on even more, but we got to be really careful because we don't want to burn out and we don't want to overburden ourselves and end up with nothing. Okay, so if you know that you can keep up and you have no doubt whatsoever, and you know that you're far from your burnout period, then sure, keep doing it, add a little bit more. But don't get to the point where you might get bored, and don't get to the point where you're going to start forgetting stuff. And by the way, it's really easy to read new material, and it's really easy to memorize a new ayah. What's really difficult is to retain. Okay, this is why repetition and review can be so much more important than getting new knowledge. If the teacher reaches the place where the sheikh usually sits and does not find him there, he waits patiently for him and he stays close to his door. The student does not skip his daily lessons unless out of concern that the sheikh has an aversion to a given lesson for some reason, since he knows the sheikh's preference for being read to at one time and not another. So if you go and the sheikh doesn't answer the door, maybe he's out, and inshallah he's going to be coming. Or maybe he's still getting up because it's early in the morning and he's going to come answer that door. Stick around. Remember, the sheikh has what you want. Don't feel that you've been slighted, but stick around to try to obtain what you can. And if the sheikh isn't able to come, make dua. The sheikh might be occupied with something that really is more important than teaching you. If he finds the sheikh sleeping or occupied with something important, he waits and does not interrupt the sheikh by seeking permission to enter. The student should take it upon himself to strive hard to achieve all he can while he is free of responsibility and energetic, since his body is so strong and his mind is alert and occupied by few things, before he is confronted with obstacles of heroism and notoriety. So before you become a leader, study. Because once you become a leader, once you become put in a position of responsibility, your opportunity to study is going to be much less. And if you do find some time to study, you're probably going to have your mind totally occupied with affairs. So really take full advantage of any times when you don't have to earn and when you don't have to take care of anyone else. Because as you go through life, you're just going to get more and more responsibilities, and it's going to be harder and harder to study. The student should recite with the sheikh early at the beginning of the day because of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, "O Allah, bless my nation in its earliness." So if you go and you study early in the day, then you fall under the supplication of the Prophet ﷺ. So that's one reason to do it. Another reason is that experience, any long generation, centuries of experience shows that in the morning we seem to be more open to learning and our brains are just working better at that time. If the sheikh sees benefit in giving others priority at a certain time because of a legal reason and he alludes to it, his order should be followed. What is considered early? A little bit before Fajr, up until the time you got to go to work. Imam al-Nawawi is now going to close this chapter with talking about how to treat envy, pride, and arrogance. Now, earlier on in the chapter, he mentioned that we need to get rid of these things, and I told you that later on he was going to talk about it, and here he comes. He says, every Muslim is obliged and strongly advised to not harbor envy towards his peers or anyone else because of some good quality that Allah the Generous has given them. And likewise, the student should not boast about anything that he himself achieves. He says a student, right? Because he's concentrating on teaching, but really this applies to everything in life. We shouldn't have envy when Allah gives his bounties to someone else. And we shouldn't get mad that they got it. Okay, we already talked about this, but we didn't talk about how to remove it. So Imam al-Nawawi says, the way to remove pride is by the student reminding himself that his achievement did not occur through his own power and strength, Rather, it was only through Allah's grace. Therefore, the student should not be proud of something he did not produce, something that Allah Most High placed in him. So yeah, we take the means, we put in the time, we show up at class, but in the end, whether or not we actually get anything out of it is a gift from Allah. Because we're going to see people that do nothing that get more, and we're going to see people that did more that get less. In the end, whether or not we get anything and whatever it is, it's really a gift from Allah. So we really can't be proud of something that we know is a gift from Allah. And the way to overcome envy is to know with certainty that it was the wisdom of Allah Most High that brought a good trait to a person. So one should never object to it, nor should one dislike wisdom that Allah Most High willed and thus He Himself does not dislike. We don't know why Allah gives things to people and withholds things from other people. What we do know is that Allah is just in all that He does, and He's fair in all that He does. So, we shouldn't get mad at Allah, and we shouldn't envy other people for what they get, because for all we know, it might turn out to be the cause of their downfall. They might end up using it for something haram, or maybe we would have. The way to eliminate boasting is to know that it destroys whatever one has in the afterlife and one's blessing in this life, which makes oneself blameworthy. And to know that in reality one does not truly possess anything worthy of aggrandizement. Okay, you've got nothing to boast about. Okay, so it's all from Allah. And even if you boasted about a good thing, you know in your heart all of the nasty things you've done. So there's nothing that you should be really boasting about in any case. May Allah spare us His displeasure and grant us success in pleasing Him. Ameen. Inshallah, this is where we're going to end today's lesson. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.